questions that I'm often asked is, how do you bridge the generational gap? The gaps between all the generations. And I think, you know, this is the best answer that I can give to that question. Anybody feel gap in the room right now? When we enter into the presence of God together, all that stuff just disappears. I don't feel separated from anybody here. When I see people worshiping, whoop, I'm ringing, I'm okay? You know, some of the older people, some of the younger people, I see you worshiping, I feel I look and I go, that's my heart. That's my cry. That's my longing. And I think when people, I'm going to talk a little bit about Gen X and about the generations. Again, I get also the question a lot, well, who's Gen X? And, you know, what are they about as a generation? And again, pretty much this is the demonstration. Who is Gen X? I think you could sum up in one phrase. They have a longing to be carriers of the presence of God. That's who Gen X is. I haven't met a Gen Xer, honestly, of all the people I've talked to who don't have that cry and that longing for the presence and the glory of God. Whether that's coming into the church or coming out in the world, going out and impacting the world, but that's the cry in the heart of Gen X. And is there any way people could move more this way? I feel like I'm going like this. Just come, we're a small group so we can be nice and cozy. Family. We tried that. The problem is it's the way the shirt moves. See? You think that'll work? We're afraid it was going to fall. Whoops. Yeah, that's here. Sorry, Mike. Maybe I should just hold the mic. This sweater is not conducive to mics. So. We tried that too. It flips away. See? Oh, like this? Together. Except now it's facing me, which is the opposite of what they want. Can you hear me? Is that good? Yeah. Is that going to work? Thank you for moving. That's way better. How many of you are familiar even with the terms Gen X, Boomer, Millennial, Builders? Put your hands up, don't be shy. Or maybe I can say how many are not, because I don't want to be using terms and people are like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's okay, put your hands up if you don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, we'll do the quickie overview of who are the generations. Those are terms that sociologists have given to describe the different generations. I think we have builders here, people from the builder generation. Those are people that have been born before, would be born before 1945. So do we have any builders here? My auntie. This is my aunt, by the way. My great aunt, actually. Just come here for one little quick sec, Auntie Grace. This is one of my grandmothers, my Baba's many sisters. Yeah. They had a huge family, what, 20, 21? Yeah. 20. 20. Yeah, 20. And they love God. And her and my other great aunts prayed for my parents' generation. We were brought up Ukrainian Greek Orthodox, so we didn't really have a living knowledge of God. And they prayed for my mom and her sisters and our families. And in 1 year, in literally 1 year, our whole families went from being not saved to saved, boom. I just remember as a kid, 1 year there was alcohol at Christmas and the next year there wasn't. And like, this is righteous inheritance, like right here. You know, and actually your mom, my great-grandmother, was an amazing prayer warrior. So I just want to honor my Auntie Grace. For me, it's just awesome that she could be here. It's a big surprise that she could be here.
Yeah, we're backing you up.
I know they are. They always say that every time they see me. We're backing you up. So she's part of the builder generation. Then we have the boomers, who I think could be the majority, certainly the majority of the people at this conference. You'd be born between the ages of 1945 to 1964. How many boomers in the room? Okay, then you've got Gen Xers, who were born between 1965 and 1979. roughly. That's Gen X. How many Gen Xers in the room? And the last category that they've named are millennials, who are also called the Y generation, who are also called the Echo Boom. They're mostly kids of the boomers. They're born sort of between 1980 and 2000. Do we have any millennials? I don't think we have any millennials. Ah, you're a millennial, yay. Okay. There we go, so we have all 4 generations here. We do have the millennials here. Most boomers, I think, most boomers are familiar with the term boomer because it's been talked about a lot in the media. The reason that is because the boomers are a big generation. Like, it's size-wise. You know why they're called boomers? Because there was a baby boom after the war. People had gone off to war, no babies were getting born, they came back, boom. There was a boom in the population. So when you look at demographics, you actually see this huge, big, like a mountain of people being born between 1945 and 1965, and that's the baby boom group. Then what you see in the chart is this huge trough, like this, that goes below the surface. Then it's followed with a second, slightly smaller little mountain behind it. That little mountain behind it, that's the millennials, the kids of the boomers. That trough, that's the Gen Xers. The birth rate declined significantly for a number of reasons. I mean, some of them were just sociological reasons. Some of them were the fact that abortion was legalized in 1973, right in the middle of the Gen X generation, and even birth control coming in a whole different way. You know, just values changing, mindsets changing. And so we ended up in this sort of, our generation is like this tiny generation sandwiched between 2 larger generations. What that means just on a practical level is it contributed to this ongoing sense in the Gen X generation from the time we were small. There's no real place for us. We don't really have a place, we don't fit. And part of the reason that was is because, for example, marketers, if you're in marketing and business, who do you market to? The biggest possible market, right? You don't bother marketing to the small markets. So literally, we were never targeted. And because we weren't targeted, we were never seen. Like, if you're not targeted in the media, you're not shown in the media. Do you understand? You're not being reflected in the media. And even if you're not aware of that, it's just like being a black person in a white culture. You never see black people. There's always that feeling of alienation because it's like, I don't see anybody like me. And I use this classic example that there was a show in the 80s called 30-something. It was a big boomer show called 30-something because that's when all the boomers were in their 30s. And when it was 30-something, I was in my 20s. And by the time I got into my 30s, the big show was like Dawson Creek, which was for all the millennials. And I just remember thinking, it is like never cool to be me. It's like all the cool things, all the cultural things, it's never cool to be me. There's this, and it's not something that we're even conscious of. Most Gen Xers are like, wouldn't even have realized that. Except if you start talking with Gen X, you find that there's this sense that they all seem to carry. It's funny, it's like the one thing we carry that brings us to common ground as a generation is the feeling like we don't really belong. Yeah, it's a feeling of alienation. It's not a great thing to rally around as a generation, right? See, boomers have a very strong sense of who you are as an identity because boomers were shaped by the 60s, by what happened with the whole, 60s the Jesus people on the Christian side and the hippie movement, right? The 60s and 70s. This is like sort of the cultural touchstone of the boomer generation, right? It's when their voice was heard and you saw yourself as a unit, like as a generation that could actually affect change, right? Gen X has no such thing, has no such marker. We're actually, for the most part, quite isolated and quite separated, even one from another. It's tough to find a whole lot of Gen Xers clustering together anywhere. Like, even when you find a few of them, it's like, woo, we're excited because we found 5 that are actually together. And so the Gen X, just generally now, this is sociology, this is not talking about church and what God wanted, but the Gen X have kind of got that feeling. And then in addition to that, when most of us, the older Gen Xers, started to graduate, get out of high school, get into university, come out of university, we did so in the 90s, right in the midst of the worst recession since the 1930s. You couldn't get a job. I know, I came out at that time. You couldn't get a job, literally. You'd do like 100 resumes just to get an interview, and then how many interviews to get a job. So once again, what's that message? There's no place for you. There's no room for you. There's no, because all the companies were downsizing, so what are they doing? They're filling entry-level positions with boomers who have 10 years of experience, but they've got 2 kids and a mortgage, and they'll take any job they can get. So if you're a boss, what are you going to hire? The inexperienced guy who knows nothing? Or you got this experienced guy who will work for the same money? Of course you're going to hire the experienced guy. So it was like, and it's interesting because so Gen X learned very early on that we had to adapt if we were going to survive. We're very adaptive as a generation. Actually, when we came out of schools, also the same time, this